Okay, so in this presentation, I'm going to continue on and do a little enemy patrol. So we have our player character here, and I'm just going to set up a simple sprite that kind of moves back and forth patrolling. Then, of course, you could build any kind of variation onto this that you want. You'll see that this system scales up pretty nicely. So I'm going to use this, again, from one of those glitch the game assets. I'm going to use the NPC chicken. And just have a simple sprite here. Gonna zoom in on this guy. So a couple things I'm gonna do. I'm gonna set this up very similar to our player character. So in other words, I'm gonna go to physics 2D. I'm gonna add a rigid body. I'm also gonna add a box collider. And I'm gonna modify that box collider in a way that makes sense. So I'm gonna make it about the size of the chicken. And let's see, slide this around a little bit. That looks pretty good. That's about right. That looks good. So box collider, rigid 2D body. When I hit the play button, chicken falls to the ground. Exactly what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of the rigid body, and ultimately we're going to turn this. We're going to make it is kinematic. In fact, I'll do that right now. So with the sprite selected, I'm going to go into the rigid body 2D component and make sure it is kinematic. I'll demo why that's important here in just a few minutes. So I'm going to build a real simple state machine. It's going to be real simple, real fast. I'm just going to move this over a little bit. So I'm looking at my game window now. I'll double click and zoom back in on the frame of my non-player character, my enemy chicken here. So the idea is I want this character to kind of patrol back and forth. And so what we'll do is I'm going to build a system that uses these two little waypoint markers, and I'll probably use an empty game object, maybe for the demo. During the demo, I like to use geometry. It's a little bit easier to see sometimes. But using the actual geometry isn't necessary. I'm going to just scale this sphere down to 0.2, so it's just a little sphere. And this, we'll call this position 1. Or waypoint 1, or whatever you want to call this. This is the position that the chicken's going to move to. So I'm just moving that over, and I'm kind of paying attention to its location here. I'll zoom out a little bit. So I kind of want to patrol back and forth in this space. I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to move it over, and I'm only moving it on one axis, right about there. Moving along the x-axis, I'm going to call that position 2. I'm going to take both of these, select both of them, just move them down a little bit closer to the ground. Okay, so I got position 1 over here, got position 2 over here. I'm going to make sure that I have my enemy selected. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build a real quick state machine. The state machine is I'm looking for a transform, and inside transform, somewhere in here, is a move towards action. And this will work really well. I'm going to double click and do a move towards, and we're going to use the game object as the owner, so we want to move the enemy towards an object, and the target object that we want to move to, I'll just use position 1. So right out of the box, if I hit the play button, that happened a little fast. Let me slow that down so we can see this a little bit more clearly. I'm going to go into state 1. I'm going to take the max speed. I'm going to take that down to 1. Let's see what that gives us. It was a default of 10. There we go. So that's a lot slower than I wanted to, but it moved towards position 1. Now, so currently it's moving towards position 1. There is a finished distance, so it can finish within a meter of the object to be considered done. I'm going to take that down to 0.5, or maybe I'll even take it down to 0.1. So basically it'll end up right on top of that sphere. Now, in order to do that, it'd be a good idea to take the collider off this geometry, because we're not going to do a hit test on the position. This is just a visual aid, a little visual representation. I'm going to take the collider, turn off that component on both position 1 and 2. I want to make sure the chicken is selected, or the enemy is selected, and I have the state 1. So I'm going to test that one more time to see where its finished distance is. So you can see we're moving towards that position, and once it pretty much gets right on top of that thing, it'll stop. So what I want to do is I want to build a real quick event, and the event is going to be a change direction. And I probably only need one event to do this. I'm going to go back to the state. The finished event is going to be change direction. I'm going to right click and add the change direction as a transition. Now I could rebuild this state over here and do a move towards, and then plug in those same variables, or the same distance and finish distance. But I'm going to delete that because I have all that information built into state 1. So I'm just going to right click and copy states. I'm going to reuse that over here. Playmaker is asking me if I want to use it as a template. I don't, or define it as a template. I don't. I'm going to wire change direction over to 2 and change direction over back to 1. So I'm just going to create a little loop here. And state 2, the target position, we'll just use that second position. There we go. And the result should be that our little enemy character here moves back and forth. When it gets close to the target position, the finished event will fire back off to state 2. So now we have this kind of back and forth. So this chicken is currently set to is kinematic. And one of the advantages of doing that is we're not using velocity or force to do this. Now we could build our own system that's a move towards rather than use this action, and we could set a velocity until we get to a location, just like we're doing with the player character. But instead of listening to the keys, we could just kind of hardwire it to ping pong back and forth based on velocity. But this move towards works works really well. So it's using a transform function, and so if I go up here and I try to push this chicken, it's just there's not much I can do. In fact, you just kind of flip me over. If I turn off is kinematic on the chicken, you'll see that force can start to affect it. So I can push the chicken around. Now maybe that's something we want to do. The minute we make it is kinematic, it basically ignores all of the physics that's happening. It'll completely ignore the physics engine. So just something to keep in mind. Currently it's using the transform function to ping pong back and forth, and we can have a little bit more control over it by making it is kinematic. It'll kind of fix its position. So that's just a real quick rundown of creating this simple waypoint system. Now probably what we'll end up doing, I'm just going to move that down to a position that kind of makes sense so that the chicken doesn't float from the sky. We could do that same thing that we did before with controlling the animation, and we do it in state 1 and state 2, or move to position 1, move to position 2. We can create the same animations we did for the player character and have some actions that call animator. And actually the only thing we'd have to do is just actually really run a default walk cycle. In fact, let me demo that really quickly. So I really only want one animation here, and I have a walk cycle here. I've already chopped it up according to its sprite sheet, and I'm just going to select that. Actually, I'm going to go over, select the chicken here. I'm going to go to the animation window, and just like I did in the last presentation, I'm going to create a quick clip, and I'll call this call it chicken walk, and I'll save. And so we have the chicken walk animation. I'm going to go down and select all the sprites associated with that, and I'll drag that into my animation, and I'll bump that sample down to 30. So now, because we have a chicken animation and we have a chicken controller in our animator, if I double click and go into animator, the first animation that we create is going to be set to its default. So whenever you see inside animator, you see a couple different states. The more animations you create, you'll have more clips in here. One of them is going to be set to this orange yellow, and that means that it's default. So you can, if we had another state, and I'll just create a temporary empty state, this would be an animation clip. I can set it as default. I don't want to do that though, and I'll just delete it and say yes, delete. So right now, when I go back to scene or window or my game, and I hit play, the chicken's walking. He's moonwalking right now, which is kind of cool. But it'll kind of ping pong back and forth. So it looks pretty good the way that he's walking around. However, I do want to flip him. So if I go into the chicken state, state 1, we're going to want to set the scale to -1. So I'll just do transform, and we'll do set scale, and the scale will be along the X just like we did before. -1. I'll go to state 2, and we'll set scale on the X, and we'll set it back to 1. So again, and that was all just based on my chicken's orientation. And so now, as he walks towards the first position, I'll get there and I'll flip and start moving back towards the second position. So he'll just kind of ping pong back and forth. So the other thing is I still have my state labels on in the gameplay through Playmaker, and I really, it's helpful, but I really don't want to look at it. So I'm just going to go into preferences in Playmaker and show state labels in game view. I'm going to uncheck that. And so now I'll get a clearer view of what's going on here. So now I got my chicken patrolling. He's moving back and forth. Obviously the position 1 and position 2 markers, those we can just turn off the mesh render. So I'm just going to select each one of them and turn off mesh render. Now we don't see them. If we need to, we can flip them back on. And again, all the more reason that in the future I'd just use empty game objects to mark that, but just to kind of rough that out. So yeah, there we go, patrolling enemy. We'll continue to scale this up a bit, and we'll do a basic health system, where we can start jumping on top of the chicken and maybe squish him, or the chicken might, shoot an egg at us or something. We'll have some kind of interaction between the player and the chicken, and start thinking about player health. We'll do that a little bit later.